Well, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Yeah. Well, why don't we begin? How many of you have heard the story of Richard and Sabina Wurmbrand? A few of you have. Okay. Both in the Holocaust and then also under Soviet occupation in communist Romania following the war. Theirs was a life of remarkable faith, unshakable integrity. They had unimaginable experiences and suffering and showed relentless kindness. Richard was born in 1909 in Bucharest, Romania, to an Orthodox Jewish family. And Richard Wurmbrand was the youngest of 4 sons. As a young man, Richard became fluent in 9 languages. He met his wife, Sabina Oster, who was a chemistry student, and Sabina was also Jewish, and they were married in 1936. Now, Richard became a stockbroker in high finance. They enjoyed an elite social life in their early 20s, and religion became unimportant for both of them, and they identified as Jewish atheists. Then life changed. Richard was diagnosed with tuberculosis. They both went to the country to find healing. And there they met a man who shared with them about Yeshua's love. This man had a love for the Jewish people and said to Richard, "Many Jews have not read about the most famous Jew who ever lived." Richard began to read the Besorah, the Gospel of John, and his entire worldview flipped upside down. He was struck by how Yeshua spoke about love and was ready to live out that love in the most profound ways. Eventually, Richard says that he surrendered to God and he gave his life to Yeshua. His wife, Sabina, was horrified. She liked her life as it was, and she had no interest in giving up her social leisures for what she thought would be a boring religious life. However, after she was disgusted by a drunken party that she attended in her social circles, she also gave her life to Yeshua, unsure what the future would bring. And then, in 1939, on the eve of World War II, they had a son named Michai. Michai says that his earliest memories are of his mother holding his hand and running like crazy into a bomb shelter. His father wasn't there because he, along with a group of other Jewish believers in Yeshua, were traveling from bomb shelter to pray with people and hand out Bibles. Richard and Sabina's lives would never be the same, and certainly would never be boring. Let's pause and get into our topic today, and I'll finish their story as we go through. Last week we talked about the midah of integrity. A midah is a soul trait or a heart quality in the Jewish Musar tradition. At Ruach we emphasize Musar a lot, to work in a disciplined way to learn to love better, to become more kind, to grow in humility, in chesed, in generosity, and in this case, integrity. We looked at integrity in the Joseph story last week. We connected it with excerpts from the Sermon on the Mount in our Besorah, and we discussed how we relate in integrity, how we relate to others, how integrity is played out in our words and in our promises and in our close relationships. This week, as we continue reading through the Sermon on the Mount, let's continue with our theme of integrity through a different lens and a different story, Richard and Sabina's story. Let's look at integrity within ourselves. Inner integrity in the deepest places of our hearts. I'm calling this message the secret place. Last week we defined integrity as internal strength to match internal and external challenges. So think about a bridge having integrity. A bridge has integrity when it holds the train that will go over it and when it withstands weather and erosion over time. The integrity of that bridge fails when it develops a crack in its foundations, or if it were to crumble under the weight of the train. So in Hebrew, the word tom, from the root tamam, meaning to be complete or whole or upright, it's sound. Inner integrity is the strength of character to continue to walk uprightly, to remain sound and whole when things become difficult, to hold fast to our values and deepest commitments in the face of pressures and temptations. Now, we read today in Matthew 6:1, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before others to be seen by them. Otherwise, you have no reward from your Father in heaven." Yeshua tells us that when you do acts of integrity, acts of righteousness, pay attention to your deepest motivations. And he goes on to apply this to 3 categories: when you give tzedakah, when you give charity, when you pray, and when you are fasting. So what do these 3 things have in common? Giving, prayer, and fasting. Well, in first century Judaism, these are like hallmarks of a tzaddik, of a righteous person. So if you wanted to make sure that everyone knew you were in the high religious elite, you made sure that people saw you give. You made sure that people noticed when you were praying, and you made sure that people were aware that you were fasting. Yeshua calls us to account for our inner selves. Beware not to do these things only on the outside for show. They will be hollow deeds, and you will become a hollow person. Later rabbinic discussion in Talmud also muses on similar ideas. We read, a Torah scholar whose inside is not like his outside is not a true Torah scholar. Elsewhere in Talmud, we find an interesting discussion. Our sages argue, or one particular sage argues, that the reason the temple was destroyed in 70 CE was because the Torah scholars neglected to say the blessing before they read from the scroll. At first glance, this is ridiculous. We lost the temple because of a bracha, but I think it's saying something different. Nestled within this blessing is the concept of Torah is something that we uphold for its own sake. This Talmud is wondering, perhaps the temple was destroyed because we upheld the Torah in order to be seen by others. We upheld the Torah not within our hearts. It was a hollow Torah, and that led to a hollow temple, a temple which could no longer stand, and it crumbled. Perhaps Yeshua and these later rabbinic teachers were critiquing the same leaders just some 40 years before the temple was actually destroyed. Your integrity is cracked. You do the Torah for the wrong motives. Your reward will be from the people that you impress, not from God. Doing righteous deeds is good and it's important, but Yeshua calls us to an even higher standard. Don't just do these things. Guard your inner motivations and work on them deep within your heart. Integrity is a midah which cannot be compartmentalized. You see in the English word itself, integrity is related to the word integrated. A person with integrity is a person whose inner life is in harmony with his or her outer life and actions. A person who is whole all the way through, a person of substance. So Yeshua says to his followers, when you give, don't give sounding a trumpet like those hypocrites do. No, when you give in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. In fact, when you pray, don't make it a show. Go into your inner room. Shut the door. Pray only to your Father who sees in secret. And when you fast, don't let other people know. Wash your face. Anoint yourself. Fast for your Father who sees in secret. What is it about this secret place? What is the secret place? Why is our secret inner world so important to God? Back to Richard and Sabina. When the Germans invaded Romania, Richard and Sabina continued to pray in the bomb shelters, hand out Bibles. They rescued Jewish children out of the ghettos. Their home became a safe haven. Being Jewish themselves, they were arrested several times and almost executed at least once. And they were released because of connections that they had. And so they used their home to rescue other Jewish families. Sabina lost her entire Jewish family in the concentration camps. In 1944, Russia invaded Romania with 1 million troops. Romania first fought with Germany against Stalin, but then switched sides and joined with Russia and defeated the German occupying armies. Richard and Sabina then used their home now to shelter German soldiers who were fleeing Russia. These were the same German soldiers who had killed her family. One captain actually told Richard, he recounts this, I don't know why you're doing this. Why are you hosting us? You're Jewish. I hate the Jews. We would have killed you. Actually, when Germany wins, we still will kill you. Richard said, even so, when you come under my roof, you will be loved. One night after midnight, the actual man who was responsible for the deaths of Sabina's family showed up at her door. And he was crying. Sabina came to the door, got out of bed, And she says that she forgave him, she embraced him, and she cooked a meal after midnight and served him dinner. The next morning, he also gave his life to Yeshua. At the same time as they're rescuing fleeing German soldiers, Richard and Sabina would invite Russian soldiers into their home and give them Bibles. His purpose was to share God's love with everyone, regardless of who they were, or what their background was, or where they were coming from. Now, the government was atheist and insisted that there was no God as policy. Within a few years, religious gatherings and readings of the Bible were prohibited, unless it was sanctioned by the communist government and supported their agenda. Richard and Sabina continued to meet, however, with their community out in a public park, saying that it was a birthday. Every week was a birthday celebration. Then, prompted by his wife, Richard stood up in front of a monumental conference with hundreds, even thousands of religious leaders. It was broadcasted on the radio, and he spoke out against religious persecution. And shortly after, the secret police abducted him and brought him into prison. Richard recalls, "The first thing that came into my mind was that in the Bible, the words, 'do not be afraid,' occurred 366 times, once for each day of the year, and then one extra. I knew that God was with me, even in the van of the secret police, and this gave quiet to my heart." Now, the police told his family that he had died. They even sent soldiers as actors, dressed up in prisoners' clothes, to say that they had attended his funeral in prison. In prison, he received one slice of bread per day and was 90 pounds after 3 months. He was interrogated, he was beaten relentlessly, he was hung upside down, he was required to walk on cuts on his feet. And he recounted that after he was beaten, one time he told the officer, "I forgive you for what you are doing to me." And the officer got angry. They put him through brainwashing torture. 17 hours per day, he was required to sit straight up without a back on the chair. If he slouched or rested his head or closed his eyes, he would be beaten. The point was to break his will. If he would just renounce his faith in Yeshua and say, "There is no God," he would be free. Yet Richard's inner faith, his integrity was so solid, he didn't crumble. Finally, after 2.5 years of torture, Richard was given a trial. It lasted 10 minutes. The only thing Richard could manage to say was, "I love God." He was sentenced to 20 more years in prison. But no matter what they did to him, they could not get to that secret place inside. How had he become so strong? I think the secret is in the Sermon on the Mount. Consider when Yeshua says, "Don't give to others so that others will acknowledge you." He adds, "Don't even let your left hand know what your right hand is doing." In everyday life, watch your inner world. The only way to stand strong when pressure comes is to build your integrity on the inside. Yeshua is calling us to such high levels of ethics in our deepest inner places, the intangible places of our soul, where our tendencies and our unconscious patterns and our inner motivations operate behind the scenes of our lives. Guard against motives that are laced with self-preservation, giving or praying only to receive something in return, because you'll miss the mark. You'll miss the heart work. And worse, it might set us up to live a life where our deepest needs are met only by other people's praise or by the comfort of our things. And if our inner secret place is not whole, we look to outer things to get through life. And those outer things will always crumble under enough pressure. While Richard was in prison, Sabina and their son kept the work going at home, and they continued to teach and meet and hand out Bibles. Soon her apartment was taken over by the government. Then one day, 6 a.m., the police came, took her also, leaving her son alone. She was taken to a slave labor camp building the Danube Canal. And they did this by carrying rocks with bare hands in the freezing cold without any more than the clothes that they had left the house with. She was never told how long she would be there. She was never given a trial. she would be thrown into the river and pulled back up by the guards just for their fun. The hunger, she says, were so bad that the women would eat tree bark and grass. But you know, Sabina says that she still fasted one day a week because she had done this at home. That's fasting in the secret place that Yeshua talks about, isn't it? Most difficult, she says, for Sabina was missing her son. And the guards would tell the mothers who had no idea where their children were that if they signed a statement that denied God, they would be reunited with their children. She said that the only thing that got her through was Yeshua's promise. Yeshua promised he was with her all the days, even in prison. And so, even in prison, she decided with the other women to always greet one another with this greeting: "Give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, and his mercies endure forever." Chodu. No matter what happened, they would use this greeting. And she says that it made the prison feel joyful. She said everything was changed just by giving thanks to the Lord in the most difficult circumstances. After 3 years in prison, Sabina was released. When you give, when you pray, when you fast, do these in the secret place of your heart, where only your Father sees, and then your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Yeshua is looking deep within our hearts into the deeper inner motivations and intentions. He realizes, I think, how complex motivations are. We all have mixed motivations. In fact, most of us aren't even able to parse our motivations, and we don't even know why we do many of the things that we do, even good things in life. Yeshua's solution is simple. Instead of trying to parse all of the motivations, just seek God in your secret place. Just seek God in your inner world. Seek his reward above everything else. Seek his presence deep in your heart above all other successes in life. Yeshua tells us to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness. And when we seek these things, all other things that we need in life will be added also. And this is very advanced integrity. Richard and Sabina had built a strong foundation, and their integrity held the same on the inside as it was on the outside. Even in the face of the most extreme trial, theirs was a faith on which every aspect of life could stand. After his short trial, Richard was placed in solitary confinement for several more years. No books, no paper, no writing, nothing but chains in a small stone room. He didn't even have a window. For Richard, the secret place became everything he had. Allow me to quote Richard as he reflects on this time. "I would walk back and forth. Every night I would meditate on the verses in the Bible I remembered. Then I would pass hours praying for the whole world. I traveled my spirit from one country to another, for America, for Africa, Australia. Every night I would deliver a sermon. There was no visible audience, but I preached to God. I preached to the angels. They are also interested to know what I think and what I have to say. I would prepare a regular sermon and I would deliver it. And then I would pray. But then they started to add narcotics to my food, and I could no longer remember what to pray. It was one of the most desperate moments in my life when I tried one evening to say the Lord's Prayer that we read today, and I found that I forgot it. I said, 'Our Father, holy is your name,' and I forgot the rest. So I said, 'Yeshua, I love you. Yeshua, I love you.' I think that is prayer enough." Then I couldn't even do that. Then my only prayer would be the beating of a loving heart. When Yeshua told us how to pray in our readings today, the Lord's Prayer or the disciples' prayer, do you know many scholars believe that Yeshua was reciting an early oral version of the Amidah that we pray in the Siddur. The themes of this prayer, praise, request, thanksgiving, parallel the more expanded Amidah that we have today. Yeshua might have been saying, when you pray the Amidah, pray it in the most secret places of your heart. And pray with such trust. It isn't because of how many words you say or how well you say it. Instead, simply trust. God has already heard your prayers before you even speak. For Richard, this became the simple prayer of a beating heart. The prayers that we pray as Jews are not just traditions. They reflect and even direct the focal point of our hearts, and they guide our deepest motivations. And notice that Yeshua's prayer here, it's not individual, it's plural. Our Father in heaven, give us our sustenance. This secret place of integrity is really a place where we're all joined together within the kingdom of heaven as God's people, relying on Him together. And perhaps in Richard's place of solitary confinement, he wasn't alone after all, but he was joined in some way with all those praying these same prayers of the heart. Richard continues to tell about how many times he would become so filled with joy while praying in his cell that he would dance and he would sing with joy. Richard would tell the guards when they would handcuff him, he said sometimes they would leave him handcuffed for days or weeks. He said, "You can bind my body, but you can't bind my spirit." Yeshua says, lay your treasure in the kingdom of heaven, for where your treasure is, so is your heart. Yeshua is the Musar master. A life of the Musar student is a life where we're constantly working on ourselves at the deepest levels. And in the Sermon on the Mount, he gives us in a few short chapters the heart of Musar practice: humility, trust, peace, righteousness, chesed. He teaches us in daily life how to build the kingdom of heaven on the inside, deep within our own secret place. And when the kingdom of heaven is on the inside, we have true integrity, true strength. Our foundation is built on rocks of substance rather than sand, which will always wash away. And he doesn't just mean the hope of eternity after death. I don't think that's what he means in the kingdom of heaven here. I think he means the kingdom of heaven inside him now. And consider that most people would crumble and fall into despair after so many years in confinement. But Richard had built his foundation on Yeshua's love. And instead of crumbling, he was experiencing the kingdom of heaven in the most desperate conditions on earth. He continues to reflect on his time alone in the cell. One time of prayer, the walls of the cell began to shine like diamonds. I have seen many, many beautiful things in the world. And he goes on to list many, many beautiful things that he's seen. But never have I seen the beauty which I have seen in the dark cells beneath the earth. Never have I heard such beautiful music as on that day when the King of Kings, Yeshua, was with me. We saw his loving eyes. He wiped away our tears. He said to us words of love and words of forgiveness. We knew that everything which had been evil in our lives had passed away and been forgotten by God. We were with Yeshua. We didn't even know we were in prison anymore. The secret that Yeshua shares in the Sermon on the Mount is that when we practice the kingdom of God on the inside, it comes in us, it permeates out, and we do the kingdom of God on the outside. And even in those years of solitary confinement, Richard actually, this is remarkable, helped another prisoner by using Morse code through the walls. The prisoner asked him if God could forgive him through Morse code. And through tapping on the walls of his cell, he helped him receive Yeshua and commit his life to Yeshua in solitary confinement. One time he recounts telling an officer who was beating him angrily about the love of Yeshua and about heaven. And the guard, he says, he threw his club aside and said, "How can you love me when I put you in jail and beat you? I would never love you." And then the man gave his life to Yeshua and prayed with Richard. Once an officer, after meeting Richard, put himself in prison, feeling so guilty for what he had done to so many others. After 8 years Richard told one of the guards, "You live in hate. Your whole life is full of hate. Soon you're going to hate even your wife at home. What kind of life is this?" And then he told him about God's love. And the guard was the secretary of the head of the secret police. He was so deeply moved that he slipped a paper in to be signed with his supervisor. And it was an order that just read, "Free Richard Wurmbrand." It was signed. Then one day, Richard was just simply let go. He went home. He reunited with his wife and son, and they fell on their knees together in prayer. Much later, after the regime had crumbled, Richard and his wife wrote several books. You can find them. They spoke around the world. They even spoke in front of the U.S. Senate to share his story and took off his shirt and shared his wounds. Richard started an organization to raise awareness and help people persecuted for their faith. This organization became the Voice of the Martyrs, an organization that we have supported, thanks to Connie, in our congregation at Ruach, Israel. Well, let us close with one more quote from Richard. "A faith that can be destroyed by suffering is not faith. We must nurture a faith that grows deep within the secret place of our hearts. A secret place that is filled with such trust and complete abandon to God's love. The secret place inside filled only with the kingdom of heaven." Shabbat shalom, everybody.